name's Hana Blackmore. I'm currently living way on Waiheke Island. Originated in England, as you can hear from my accent, and emigrated here in 1994. I was brought up on a farm, run organically, or in those days, as all farms were run, without chemicals. Came out here to New Zealand, clean green New Zealand, and we bought a house in the city. And 18 months after we arrived, the government announced that they were going to aerially apply pesticide over our entire suburb to get rid of an invasive moth species. So from 1996 until now, I've been involved in a succession of pesticide incursions into this country, and really as a solution to what is happening, it's just been, my background has meant that I've thought, how on earth have we gone so far in the wrong direction? It's the white-spotted tussle moth, and it wasn't so much that they were aerially spraying us. We were reassured from day one this was all perfectly safe, and everybody believed them. It had never ever been done before in New Zealand that they were going to spray a huge urban population with a pesticide. And to an extent, everybody understood, yes, this was a perfectly safe spray to use on people. And it was only 6 months into the campaign that we began to hear of people being affected, getting sick, getting really ill, acute hospitalizations. I mean, some of this happened in my own family. And it wasn't until somebody else called a public meeting and we went along and we began to hear about the effects that people were experiencing that we realized this was not a safe spray for everyone. And we were unfortunate in that we were in the very central hot zone. The government had said they would need 3 to 5 aerial sprays at night to eliminate this moth. In the end, we had 48 sprays on our property. That was spread over 7 months, but it's not as bad as shortly after that they discovered another moth out in Waitakere, out here in the west. They took 5 years to eliminate this moth, to declare an eradication. Hundreds of thousands of people were aerially sprayed with the same pesticide. We transferred our experience from the eastern suburbs out here to the west, and then subsequently to Hamilton, where they aerially sprayed a gypsy moth. And because of that experience and trying to get people's health concerns, their health effects and everything was happening, taken seriously, that we asked the government, when it was finally over, we asked them to set up like a post-mortem, a post-eradication inquiry to find out what went on. They absolutely refused. They said, no problems, nothing happened, everything's fine. That we ended up setting up our own people's inquiry, which is like come full circle now, because even after that, we were still discovering that we were being sprayed on the roadsides and in the parks and in the children's schools. And I couldn't believe, I didn't even dare tell my father that this was not the clean green country that we all thought we were coming to, but that they used pesticides and poisons and chemicals until the cows came home. The reason why I'm still actually here today, still doing this, is because I'm stubborn and I'm persistent. No, I didn't start this. Initially, a committee was set up by a whole group of other people who were really worried because they'd been affected by the sprays. I hadn't been. I had no experience. I had no correlation to bring to it. But what happened is that, coming in from the outside and having a fresh perspective meant that even when all of certainly the first spraying was over, I then got invited, because by that time my daughter was living out west. We knew what was happening out here. So we just transferred out there along with all the scientists who we got to know and had worked with, I joined in, and then the baby was left with me after everybody else retired and went home.
Would you describe yourself as an activist?
Yes.
Are you proud of that?
Yes. I feel that we all do our activist bit in our own way. And to be an activist means that you don't just sit down and wait for something to happen to you or wait for somebody else to solve the problem. You have to, in my opinion, sort of, if it's affecting you and it's affecting your neighbours and it's affecting your city, your country, then you have, in a way, a duty to be part of it. Core ingredient is persistence. Nothing happens easily, nothing happens quickly. I have never yet heard of any campaign that has succeeded, immediately. If that has happened, then obviously there was never a real problem there in the first place. But it's having to persist, to be able to change, to shift something that's become settled as being this is how the world is, and this is how it's developed. You can't change it. Well, if it's started developing and moving down the wrong path, then yes, you have to say, no, we need to divert, we need to get back to how, we need to get onto the right path. So you have to have persistence to be able to do that. If you have a conviction or that you're right, then you can become like an evangelist. You can no longer see an opposing view. You can no longer have empathy with anyone else, because if you're saying, I am absolutely right, then you've got blinkers on, you're going.
So how has being active in the pesticide space affected your life?
Taken it over. I came here, seriously, because I had been, in many respects, active in different community things in England before I came out here. When I came out here in '94, I thought, this is lovely. Nobody knows me out here. I can do exactly what I want. And then this thing happened to me. And so I was brought back into it. And so ever since then, I mean, my children say, oh, can't we just have a normal mummy who does normal things?
What's your answer to that?
I am normal. This is what we do. And I will say that both my children have, to a degree, retained that, and they won't stand by and see injustices.
So is injustice one of those core ingredients?
Absolutely. Too often you see this, and it's like a human right that everyone is treated equal, but we don't see people treated equally. We don't see people who have money, people who live in rich cities. They can buy political favors. They can get people elected. They can spend their money. They can pay for lawyers to overcome something that, for instance, spraying on the roadside. But if you live in a poor community, you don't have that power. And so, to me, the human rights of people just being airily sprayed or sprayed on on the roadside, or having poisons laid down in their, in their bushland, and they haven't the money, they haven't the power to do anything about it. That's an injustice, and it's a breach of their human rights.
How do you cope with being a persistent, active human rights practitioner?
Well, I don't do yoga and I don't do anything like that. So I think probably I cope with it by doing the best I can. Otherwise, you awake at night worrying, oh my gosh, I should have done this, or I should have done that, or, my poor friend is in a terrible way. I really must. So the best antidote to that is actually doing it, and doing it to the best of your ability.
I mean, there's a lot of weight that you might carry sometimes in campaigns, and people rely on you. Do you have a means assuring yourself or a close group of people that help you in your work?
Yes and no, but one of the things that I've always believed in and I have seen happen is that, yes, there can often be a burden on you, that, you know, you feel as if you have a responsibility. You promised, I'll do what I can, and then that promise weighs really heavily on you. But what happens is that you can empower those people that are relying on you. I will support you, do your thing. And so by empowering them, you see when some of these campaigns develop, dozens and dozens of people, hundreds of people even, becoming empowered and activated. Yes, we can do this, you know, we're all in this together. Right, I will go to the council and I will demand from my councillor that this changes or that changes. So I think that the best way to, as I say, is not to take on the burden, because then you become like a guru that everybody relies on, and that's a heavy burden. So you just dole it back out again, give other people support.
Have you yourself been affected by chemicals?
No.
Do you know people close to you who have?
Yes.
And what's your experience of that?
Now that's quite an interesting one, because one of the reasons I've actually been able to do this is because I'm not affected by chemicals. So I can go into places and record, and in the same way as we're filming this now, to be able to go into a spray area and actually get on the ground, you know, information and facts. But when we were being sprayed by, for the tussock moth in the eastern suburbs, my eldest daughter developed, during the spraying, severe migraines, so bad. I mean, she'd never had migraines before, and she suffered from these migraines such that it didn't matter what she took, what medication, nothing. And finally she collapsed at work, and the nurse at work was very worried about her. Her eyes were dilating wrongly. She was taken off to hospital, basically. To cut a long story short, she had every single test known. She had, you know, she had scans, she had x-rays, she had, they took out spinal fluid. They did all of the things that you would think, you know, is it meningitis? Is it this? Is it that? Everything was complete blank. They couldn't find a thing wrong with her, but she still had these effects. Now, we just dismissed it. We actually didn't think it had anything to do with the spray until one day, and it was quite some while afterwards, and I was talking to my solicitor and I was asking after her daughter, and she said, oh, you know, she's just been through this terrible, terrible thing. And she explained that her daughter had had exactly the same thing happen to her as my daughter had. Exactly the same thing happened, off to hospital, the same symptoms. And she said to me, and when we were actually talking, she said to me, but of course it's got nothing to do with the spray because we're not in the spray zone. And her daughter, who happened to be sitting by and listening to all, she says, but Mum, I told you. Every school day she was standing at a bus stop in the spray zone because she used to get dropped off by her mother and picked up by the school bus. And she said, and every time they sprayed, we got drenched, all of us. The mother hadn't realised. And so this correlation between, oh, well, actually, she had been in the spray zone. And to me, that was the final thing that said to me, right, we're going to do something about this. Because this is a severe, acute symptom. This is not something minor, you know, runny nose or sore eyes.
Could you share what then happened to your daughter, the recovery? Has she recovered?
Yes, she has, but she has still persisted in having sort of atypical migraines. She'd never ever had them before in her life. And so she still, when she's under stress or she does tend to get them, and they can be quite difficult to cope with. Subsequently, she was living with us, as I say, at the time, in the white spotted tussock moth spray. She moved out west, and darn me if they didn't then start spraying out west. And so she was working in the city, so she had to come and live with us during the whole of the spray period, because she couldn't stay in the spray zone because of fear of the worsening situation. And she eventually, when she went back to Waitakere, and she got pregnant, and she had a little baby, and then they came to live with us very briefly whilst they were between houses. And darn me if the government weren't proposing to aerially spray us again for some other caterpillar, some other moth that had invaded the country. So these things persist, and you can understand how it gets to the point where there's nowhere safe for people to go. The people in power are so afraid of what I would call people power that people don't realise that they do have, jointly, together, it's like having truth and justice on your side, and that it gets to the point where they can't be ignored. But what they then do is that they shut you down before that happens. So my experience, certainly with people in power, is that they start off, oh, well, we're going to cooperate, we're going to all work together. We were invited, both myself and Dr. Merriott, we were invited to be on the government's painted apple moth team because of our experience out west, but they very soon realised that they're not going to cope with this, and they sacked us all. But fortunately, council continued to support us as the representative of the people. We've been elected by the people. But it's somehow or other, truth became lies and lies became truth. And over the years, it's been almost impossible to have conversations with people in power. I think if you're really in power, then you believe you're absolutely right, and that there is no other view. So it's been hard. It has been hard. There've always been marvellous people who you actually do, you do appreciate it when you get the people or the scientist or government who do believe you and who do understand what you're doing and can work cooperatively. After the end of the Painted Apple Moth campaign, when we not only set up our own People's Inquiry, because the government refused to do this post-mortem inquiry, so we set up our own People's Inquiry, but at the same time the government's parliamentary ombudsman had also set up his own inquiry, so he did a 4-year inquiry. His report came out in 2007. The People's Inquiry report came out in 2007. So government was hit with this double whammy. There was such a parallel. The results were the same, the opinions were the same, and we have never, and I think that although both reports were rejected, even the Ombudsman's report was rejected, but there has never been another aerial spray of an urban peoples again. So I think that's like we put a line in the sand and it's never been crossed. I think that the experience of what happened and what people in Waitakere here had to go through, I mean, it was just, it was unprecedented worldwide. It's never ever been done anywhere in the world. And I think that they realised they'd gone a step too far. Once they'd started, oh, well, we're nearly there, we're nearly eradicating them. Oh, and then the next month, we're nearly there. And they just went on non-stop. 5 years they took to eradicate it. The tussock moth was eradicated in 7 months. Certainly the actual campaign's definitely not worth it. There are so many people. It wasn't just the people who were seriously affected. People forget it's the sort of the economic and the social disruption. People lost tens of thousands of dollars in the Painted Apple Moth campaign. They lost their businesses. They had to sell their houses and move out because they couldn't put up with the ill health effects from the spraying. The social disruption. 2.5 years where they sprayed the cemetery. People couldn't visit the graves of their children. They couldn't visit, their parents in elderly homes because they couldn't enter the spray zone. That sort of disruption, no, it's not worth it. It's not worth doing these things. The Painted Apple Moth was in the first eco-city that had been declared. This was supposed to be our eco-city. And yet they were airily spraying the entire population with a pesticide. The thing was, there were alternatives. But there was, by that time, there was this feeding in government. They were going to do it their own way. They had a better way to do it. And even when people in the community offered to set up, 1,000 eyes, 1,000 places, everybody checking their backyards, everybody doing this, it was rejected. We know best, we're the scientists, and we will do it this way. There were so many opportunities lost to do something differently that I do fear that if ever there was another occasion when they were going to do this, that they would still ignore the fact that there is a far better way to do this. It's rather like doctors, first do no harm. And to me, that's what's missing. Certainly listen to the experience of scientists, and in this case doctors who concurred that there was problems with the health effects of the spraying. The thing that saved us from the tussock moth spraying was that Dr. John Clearwater had developed a pheromone. This pheromone was so exquisite that when they tested it out in Japan, which is where these things were, they were in a closed car and they'd opened up one of the things, and they had moths beating on the windows of the car, trying to get into the car. So they put this out in traps all over the suburb, and apart from a couple that were caught in a trap just down from our garden, that was the last. They realised they had actually eradicated them. But I mean, they'd obviously eradicated them by other means, including aerial spraying. But the point is, that is a tool that if you deploy it in an area where there is an infestation, then that is the most incredible tracking tool. You can find out. You don't know necessarily where these creatures are, so you can use this as a tracking tool. And yet, in the Painted Apple Moth, when Dr. John Clearwater came forward and offered his expertise to the government and offered it for free to develop a pheromone of the Painted Apple Moth, he was rejected and turned down. And they gave a contract to somebody else, a huge sum of money. But that is, again, one of the dangers that happen in these things. And we've seen it all over the place. When an expert sides with the community and says, we do have to, we have to listen to the community. We believe there are better ways to do this. They become ostracized. I mean, John Clearwater lost contract after contract after contract. And you see that happen quite often. So there are better ways to do it, but we have to be really open. And we mustn't get stuck in the same old, no, this is the only solution. What happened particularly with the Painted Apple Moth is that we were an incredible team. There was the most amazing people. We were all working together, doctors, midwives, nurses, teachers, scientists. We had the most amazing amount of people, and we all worked together. We all worked in our different ways. You seriously don't know whether tomorrow there's going to be an end to it or it's going to get worse. You just have to go with the flow of it, how it's happening. We're not Erin Brockovich. I mean, I think even Erin Brockovich had a sort of a lawyer's team that actually did the work, and she just did the amazing groundwork. No, you cannot do this on your own. Certainly we did approach people and said, look, this is happening. Are you interested in coming and, trying to find a solution and working with us? And so people were either saying, oh, but they didn't. Everybody said, oh, yes, yeah, this would be really good. So we did get together, and then other people came in. But ultimately, strangely enough, in the painted apple moth, the government came in and tried to impose a team on us. I mean, and certainly that they had a huge, great public meeting, an amazing meeting, and we were all called up. This is who's been selected, Hana Blackmore and Mariel Watts and blah, 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 and all the way along. This is who the government selected to run this community team to liaise between the government and the people. And the people said, no, we want to choose our own people. Why can't so-and-so be on it? We want so-and-so. So in the end, we all walked off Mel and I walked off the stage and said, look, if the community want us, they can vote for us. We're not going to come in here and impose ourselves on anyone. And that's what happened. And the community voted for people to be on this. And we ended up, I think, with about 20 people on this committee instead of I think they wanted 12, but we ended up with 20. So we were there representing the community. And in that sense, we were empowered. We hadn't been imposed on the community and on the people. And so we already made that contact and were able to work. There were a lot of people who didn't want to have anything to do with the committee, but who were incredibly active in their own community. And they were doing some really, really good, serious work. So it's easy to work with people who are already working. Well, apart from being stubborn and persistent, I'm just a very neat and tidy person. I'm not a leader as such, and don't ever want to be. But it's that backup person, the one that says, oh, haven't we got any statistics on what happened? Oh, yes, here you are, because that's where I know I can do it, and I. So even now today, if you saw my study, it is an entire wall of evidence, government papers, minutes, ombudsman stuff. It goes from the ceiling to the floor, because an awful lot of this is when it was all over. This is what happens to campaigns when it's all over and people say, I've had enough, I'm retiring, I'm going to go and live in the country, I never want to do anything like this ever again. They would hand over their archives. People would cut out items from the newspapers and put them into scrapbooks. And so I'd have an entire box, literally an entire box, which is a scrapbook as an archive. It's huge. And right in the middle of the campaign, I had the ombudsman contact me and say that he understood that I had, because I'd put a quote into one of my papers that had gone through, and he'd received a copy of it, and he said, have you still got the minutes from the Task Force Science meeting? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I've been to the government, and the government has said they've no longer got them. They destroyed them after 5 years or something. And I said, no, I still got them. He said, would you be happy to give me a copy? So an entire file that thick went into the Ombudsman's office, and he copied all this off. And he used that information. But if I hadn't done that, he would never have been able to. And so he was able to draw some amazing conclusions. This came out of a sustainability conference in Titirangi in April last year, and people getting together and talking about it. And I was explaining, what had happened. I put this forward as a solution, a possible solution to how do we tackle all these chemicals and pesticides and toxic things that are being sprayed on the countryside, the streets and whatever. So organisationally, it is going to be different. This is going to be nationwide, because toxics and poisons and chemicals don't stop here in Auckland. They're all over. Whereas for the other campaigns and for the other people's inquiry, that was centred on Waitakere. The people affected lived in Waitakere. So we're having to adapt to modern ways, so that it might well be that what we do is that there will be a lot of people who actually couldn't make it to an actual inquiry and talk to commissioners. And so what we can do is that we can, like this, we can video them talking about their experience and how they've been affected by chemicals. And those will be, the commissioners will be able to view those. Equally, we might end up having to do teleconferences so that somebody in Christchurch who can't come up to Auckland will be able to, come in from Christchurch. So modern technology means that we're having to adapt, and we've not done this before. Nobody's done this before, so it is a challenge. But I feel quite comfortable that with the people that we've got on board, it's going to happen. It would be lovely to see that there would be national awareness, because it's so easy, like, our local roads being sprayed, and you set up a campaign to get a spray-free zone. That's only local. Nobody else hears about it. People in Hamilton didn't even know, for instance, and this has only happened a few months ago, they didn't even know that, half of Auckland City has been spray-free on its roads for the last 20 years. They didn't know that. Well, why has nobody told us? So what I hope is that there is at least we have to do this well enough that there is a national awareness, and that there is then what we'd be looking for with the commissioners, is that with their expertise, they will be able to make recommendations. This is a possible solution. This is a probable solution. This is a possibility. This would be great, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for solutions. We need to understand how bad it is and how seriously affected people are, not just their health, but their social and their economic situations. People being trapped in their homes by chemicals. But we need to find the solution. That it's all very well, you hear these terrible stories, and there are some terrible stories out there. How do we help them? We find a solution. The solution is to get rid of chemicals. There is a huge amount of expertise here in New Zealand, but it's silent expertise. There is overseas, there are some amazing people. If I could, I'd have 20 commissioners, 20 people coming. That would be unwieldy. Who would either be a commissioner or come in and actually present, their thing. But I don't think we could afford it. We'd have to raise the money to do this, to bring people here. But the biggest difficulty we find is that too many sort of people in academia will not speak out against the current paradigm. They become threatened. They could lose their tenure. University support comes from funding from various places, and that is a real concern. People will talk to you private and say, I absolutely agree with you, but if you ask me in public, I will have no opinion. One of the things that happened with the 2006 People's Inquiry into the painted apple moth was that we did have scientists come forward, and they gave evidence at the inquiry actually highlighting what had happened to their careers and what happened to their work when they, instead of being on the scientist and the government side, they then moved over to become the people's scientists. And that was profound. And I think that there probably was an effect on that, but it takes a lot of courage. I mean, somebody said to me only the other day, look, if you want to have commissioners who are going to speak out, you're going to have to get retired professors, people who are no longer tenured, who do not have any threats hanging over their head. But I don't want to expose friends. This is the climate, and this is how it is, and it's not for me to.
There has to be a level of boldness to break through.
Yes.
You're not going to
yes.
get it by being polite.
Yes, but look what happens to anybody. Yes, people who you've only got to look at what happens to people who speak out on.
What does happen now? Tell us.
They lose their jobs. I mean, there was a case in Canada. They were airily spraying glyphosate over the forest there, and a guy spoke out and said he didn't think this was a very good idea. Blah blah blah. He lost his job. And then another guy who'd actually already retired, who spoke out in defence of this guy, was then also pilloried and lost his funding. And that was highly publicised, but it's not changed anything. Their jobs are still lost. You don't want to put people in. The only reason I can do this is because I'm retired, you know. I'm not a fragile person, but you can certainly feel the pressure. And, yeah, that's right. You make a promise and you don't want to break that promise, because then you let a lot of other people down who've also put a huge effort in. So, yeah, that sort of persistence, and just say, well, hope my health will hold up, hope that my cataracts don't get so bad that I can no longer drive or end up. Yeah. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. This is an opportunity for a whole lot of people throughout the country. People who've been isolated, whether through illness or circumstance. This is an opportunity, and we're all in this together. So, as you suggested, be bold, be courageous. We'll be there to support you. The more of us, the merrier. That would be great.